my next topic, and that is the survival of Bitcoin. When you look at some strategies or some companies that are developing alternative coins and or alternative blockchain technology out there, what are your thoughts on potentially, could Bitcoin ever be replaced by some other crypto?
I think there's about zero chance of that.
Really?
Bitcoin's
Okay.
$1 trillion digital monetary network. Bitcoin would be the most successful thing you've ever seen in your life. Period.
That's a big one.
For example, it took Microsoft 44 years to be $1 trillion. It took Apple 42 years to be $1 trillion network. It took Amazon 24 years to be $1 trillion network. It took Google 22 years to be $1 trillion network. It took Bitcoin 12 years to become $1 trillion network. And there's nothing else.
Right.
There is no other $1 trillion network. So what you have is a decentralized digital network, which is in essence transforming analog money or analog assets to digital assets. It's global. It's running everywhere on the earth. And it has been growing. It was growing at 200% a year. Try to remember when Amazon or Apple or Google grew at 200% a year.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
It's growing at 200% a year for a decade until March of 2020. And in March of 2020, that monetary fire that was burning at 200% a year hit the pandemic. And the rate of currency expansion increased by a factor of 3. We went from expanding the money supply at 7% a year to expanding the money supply at 24% a year. We're looking at the money supply expanding at 15% a year or more for the next 4 to 8 years. So how do you feed a monetary fire? And the answer is you pour money on it.
Right.
And so the macroeconomics are driving this network to grow faster. The network, it accelerated. It was growing 200% a year. Now it's growing 400+% a year. Okay, again, give me an example of anything this scale that ever grew 400% a year. And in terms of inertia, the $1 trillion is $1 trillion of monetary energy. That means you've got more than 100 million people that have $1 trillion invested in this brand. This is the only brand in the history of the world. It's $1 trillion brand, right? It's like think about the value of Coca-Cola as the brand. In the minds of 100 million plus people, you have this idea and it's worth $1 trillion. How are you going to rip that idea out of people's heads? 100 million people, thousands and thousands of companies, huge amounts of energy, a huge amount of inertia. This is the base layer digital asset network that they're all focusing upon. And so as they build their technology around it, like Square and PayPal, and as they invest in it, like Tesla, and as the message spreads, that's a lot more energy and a lot more momentum than any company or any other brand or any other idea I've seen, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think the growth is definitely, unprecedented in terms of how it's happened. I think what some people are looking at, including companies like an Algorand, which, Vasily over there, his approach is to try to solve some of the issues that Bitcoin does have. If they were, or companies like him and like that group, were to be able to actually get into the layer of creating a crypto model that starts to be a little bit more decentralized, because his argument, I don't know if you've ever listened to him, he was on the Lex podcast here recently, and his argument was basically that Bitcoin is even though it did start out as a decentralized mechanism, it's starting to centralize, like what most of all types of currency and or technology starts to do in terms of centralizing. You had mentioned ASICs, which is kind of the scenario of where this already, just because of pure hardware requirements to get into mining and starting to move into this, that it's naturally becoming a centralized potential currency. If it does become a more and more centralized currency, because this is still just 2021, you know, we're talking 2030, 2040 here before we really could see the potential of this currency. It could be controlled by some nation states or potentially just a handful of miners. What are your thoughts on that?
I think 10,000 companies or 10,000 projects have attempted to displace Bitcoin. I think they've all failed.
Yeah.
The only way you're going to be successful with another crypto asset network is if you target a totally different use case than base treasury asset. So if it's a differentiated thing with a different market segment, a different use case, then perhaps. But in fact, the market has spoken. Like I'll say it again. In the history of the human race, we've never had a $1 trillion digital monetary network. It's the most successful thing humanity has created. It is creating value and gaining market adoption faster than anything that we can point our finger at in the history of the human race. So, there's 100,000 entrepreneurs that would like to be Google or like to displace Facebook or like to displace iOS, and they're all going to have this is a better thing. But at the end of the day, if you're staring at a $1 trillion network that is more successful than everything you've seen in your life, that's growing faster than anything on earth, that's being adopted everywhere in the world, and you're going to then opt to ignore it in favor of a project in somebody's garage. I mean, it just seems irrational. When the other thing is 10 times as big as Bitcoin doing the same exact thing, then maybe it's logical. But right now the market is spoken, right? Yeah. And if you don't actually accept Bitcoin, then what do you think about Facebook, Google, Apple, and Amazon? Because those things are growing much slower with much weaker network effects right now. Right. Bitcoin transcends any company, any CEO, any country. It's spreading everywhere, and it truly is the most successful decentralized technology human beings can point toward.
Right.
So I don't know what else you'd point toward in terms of decentralization other than this. So,
well,
I would say the other things, they're ventures, and they're attempting to do something, and to the extent that they do something unique, they may find a constituency.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think your point, right, is just that its capacity and its ability to compound on growth is just unmatched, and being able to go into that market at this point, especially at the state it's in right now, which is, astronomical, that's a pretty high ticket to cross over.